One Question is designed to give subscribers valuable insights on how executive leaders in college athletics think about key issues on their respective campuses, in their departments, or within their leagues and conferences.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown and welcome to One Question, where we highlight executive leaders in college athletics. Our guest today is Dr. Jason Penry. Jason is the Vice Chancellor for University Advancement at Arkansas State University. Greetings, Jason. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ty, for having me.
Now, Jason, your background is full of a variety of experiences, most of them primarily tied to fundraising and development. I'm going to go through a list here. You were the chief of staff there at Arkansas State, and in that position, you helped open a new medical school at Arkansas State, which was the first new medical school in Arkansas in over 100 years. Prior to that, you were the chief fundraising officer at Angelo State. Prior to that, the executive director of the Posse, which is the fundraising arm of Oklahoma State Athletics, and you were a development officer for major gifts at Texas A&M. And to top all of that off, back when you were playing baseball at LSU, you were the student body president. If that's not a very impressive resume or credentials, then I don't know what is. But I am glad you're here. I want to talk to you about a couple of things relative to development.
Yeah, well, you're too kind, Ty. I appreciate that. It's been a lot of fun.
I would imagine so. Can you tell us about some of the major differences and the similarities between development in athletics and development for a university in general? And even if you want to take it to the broad spectrum, when you were working for the Texas Tech system, when you were down there at Angelo State.
I would say there are a lot of similarities. Number one being development is very much a numbers-driven profession, and our performance each year is judged largely by, I always say, did you get the big number bigger each year? And if we don't, then we've got to speak to that. But it's a very numbers-driven game. We just doubled our best giving year ever in the history, 109-year history of Arkansas State University. But I tell you, on July 1st, it started back to zero. And in that case, as the saying goes, success is not owned, it is rented, and the rent is due every day. So I always ask the people that have been in it for decades, the profession for decades, how do you keep your sanity? Because it goes back to zero every year. The advice is always stay focused on what we can control. We can control seeing the right people. We can control asking the right people, and then hopefully raising money. So I'd say the similarities, again, very numbers-driven game, and probably the biggest difference, I would say, just in generally speaking, is university advancement is probably a little more focused on the long-term view. So you see more endowment fundraising for the endowment. You see more plan giving, estate gifts. Now, that's in general, but I think we're very fortunate. I'll just add that we're very fortunate here at Arkansas State to have an incredible fundraising athletic director in Terry Mohajer that I think he really balances the short and long-term view.
When you made that transition, you worked, of course, at Oklahoma State for their fundraising arm, and of course you had some time there at Texas A&M. Then you went over to Angelo State and became the chief fundraising officer. Talk to me about that transition. What the developing relationships, the cultivation, those things were probably pretty similar, but the transition, were there any challenges you had to overcome when you went from athletics over to working with endowments and working with the universities?
Sure, there was a transition period. I did have a chance to, there's only a handful of us out there that have an athletics background that transitioned into some type of vice chancellor or vice presidential role. Scott Rabinold, University of Texas, he's one. Chris Wyrick, that was with the University of Arkansas. So some of my friends have done it, and we had kind of talked through it in the past. But yeah, you have to build trust, and I think trust building takes time. And you have to, particularly when you're making that transition with the faculty, because they initially see you as the jock, so to speak, the athletics guy who only cares about athletics. You're only going to raise money for our football program. So it did take time, 10 plus years ago when I made that transition into academics about 10 years ago. I always say it's all about performance. And again, we're a very numbers-driven game. So if you can cite the number of endowed professorships, endowed scholarships, if you can cite progress, you build trust, and they like you really quick.
That doesn't sound too dissimilar from coaches. We go through the season, and everybody's looking at what your record is at the end of the season. And come next season, last year's championship belongs to that team. This is a whole new team, and we're 0-0 at the beginning of the season. What can we do? And everybody's want to know, what can you do for us now? Well, how are you going to look at the end of the season? It sounds like there's some similarities there in terms of how you're evaluated.
That's exactly right, and it takes a team. It really does. It takes a team, and yeah, you're right. Much like coaches, fundraisers, development professionals, we have a number tied to us every year, and you can't hide from it.
And last year means nothing, right? Compared to which
last year, hey, we started back July 1st, so we pat ourselves on the back for a total of about 2 days. But we raised more money than we ever have, and we've secured over the last 5 years 40 of the top 100 gifts. And again, it's all about teamwork, and we have phenomenal athletics team, fundraising team. But yeah, it starts back to zero. And if the big number isn't bigger this year, then we're going to have a great explanation why. So it's not easy.
All right. You told me a story before we started recording. Of course, you think back however many years back when you were working with athletics, Oklahoma State, working with Texas A&M, even back when you were playing baseball. Did you ever think that someone would come to you and say, hey, Jason, we want to start a medical school, and I want you to figure out how to do that here for our university? Talk to me a little bit about that process and where your mind went when you were approached with that task.
Yeah. So one of the things that I believe that I've noticed that my former boss, the commissioner of higher ed in Louisiana, so I've had a chance to learn from a lot, but I think one of the great things about being a former student athlete and one of the great things about working in athletics is I think a lot of us who work in that realm or do now, we're very competitive, so we want to win. We want to just find a way, and we want to make things happen. When our chancellor, my former boss, came into my office and said, we want to put you in charge of this project, start a med school, it was in large part about teamwork, but you found a way. And I told you the story that I literally Googled how to start a med school. It sounds so easy, but you just find a way, and you work together. And I had to work with a great number of people on campus, and then you had to learn to. And a large part of development is building relationships. So I had to build relationships with hospital CEOs, physicians, and find a way to connect and find a way to engage and just find a way to make it happen.
Was there a buzz about that prior to, or once he approached you, then you had to go create the buzz, start talking to people? Hey, this is what we're looking at doing here at Arkansas State. And how did you even start the conversation on that? I mean, that's a big conversation starter, right? It's cool.
Yeah, it was a lot of twists and turns, and as you can imagine, there were a lot of days that weren't so good, and some were much darker than others. But I think, again, we're relying on that athletics background and saying we're going to find a way to get this done and staying positive when you need to pick everybody else up. That was a large part of it. But yeah, we had to go out and market, and there was a PR component to it to build trust. So if there's only one med school in your entire state for over 100 years, as you can imagine, when you bring up this idea, there was some element of information sharing and education, so to speak. So it was a pretty large task.
It sounds like you've accomplished it. The school opened, and you mentioned that you had your first cohort go in. Was it a couple of years ago when it opened up?
Yeah, fall of 2016, and very exciting because Arkansas ranks 48th out of the 50 states in terms of physicians per capita. So I think the long-term effects of this, I think, have tremendous potential.
Well, talking about a career in development, fundraising, advancement, for someone who is either looking to get into it or who is already in it, what are some suggestions you have for people? We always hear people talk about relationships. Do you have anything either about or beyond relationships that those who work in development or want to work in development, how they can help with their career progression?
Sure. For career progression, I always recommend anyone move into revenue producing positions such as fundraising or sales. And major gift fundraising, what I like about it is certainly not easy, but it's so much easier if you have the proper training. And I was able to work with Stu Starner at Texas A&M and Mike Holder, the athletic director at Oklahoma State, who of course has a tremendous track record, if not the best in the history of athletics. But I was able to learn from them, so it makes it much easier. So I would suggest those that are trying to get into it. At Texas A&M, I started as a data entry person, a data entry professional. So don't be afraid to work at a larger organization just to get your foot in the door. And I would say for those that are already in development, I'd recommend work closely with the advancement team, because I think any examples that you can cite of working closely and collaborating to help the overall university, I think is only going to help build your career, and having those stories to cite will only help.
I do wonder, do athletic departments and university advancement departments, is that normal across the country for them to work together, or do they isolate each other? Talk to me about what you've seen in terms of those two entities working together.
Todd, that's a great question. I talk about that often with colleagues in athletics and advancement, and it's kind of a mixed bag that you have both. And my thing is to always preach in one word: collaboration. I think it's all about collaboration, especially in a resource-short environment. Collaborations are key. And I always say you can't keep raising the bar, because, again, we started back at 0 July 1. You can't keep raising the bar alone, so you need help. For athletics, I always use this example, cite this example. Well, first I use the analogy that, look, athletics, university advancement might not be your starting shortstop, but we can come in and help hit a pinch hit grand slam for you. And I cite this example that one of my colleagues, David McLean, he knew, because we collaborate, we share information, athletics and advancement, he knew of what athletics was trying to accomplish, to name our arena, our 30-year-old arena that was founded actually when Bill Clinton was the governor here in Arkansas. But he knew about it, so he brought it to a bank, First National Bank. It was listed on a menu of options to name the arena for $5 million, because, again, we shared information. And the eventual result was the bank, Terry Mahajer came in, our athletic director, and we got our arena name for $5 million. So that's an example that my colleague David, he's primarily works with the College of Business. But because we shared information, which I think is a great sign of professional courtesy and a great trust builder, because we shared that information, he knew to put that on a menu of options, so to speak. But collaboration, and whenever I talk about collaboration, I always say it's not about these lengthy memos and such, or long 2-hour long meetings. It's about 1-minute calls, 1-sentence text, 1-sentence emails. Those go a long way. That's communication and collaboration.
All right, and touch points, right, in terms of building relationships.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, Jason, this has been an excellent conversation. I mean, your background is interesting enough, but it sounds like your future is going to be just as interesting. And I really appreciate you joining us here on One Question.
Thank you so much, Ty.
No problem. That was Dr. Jason Penry. He's the Vice Chancellor for University Advancement at Arkansas State University. And of course, this is Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of One Question is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.